Hi, folks. I've been asked this week whether I think that the average American was aware of or anticipated the coming of the Cold War in 1945. Um, and the short answer for that is probably no. I think that most people in the United States um, did not have on their radar the prospects for a major superpower conflict that would last for much of the remainder of their lives. You have to keep in mind that the generation alive in the mid 40s had been through um, uh, many of them the First World War, but my parents' generation had lived through the Depression and then the Second World War. And these were extremely stressful and traumatic times for the American people. And most people in 1945, I think, are focused on the end of the war bringing a return to normality and something approaching a better life here at home. Millions of American servicemen are focused on getting home, and they're not all going to get returned to the United States immediately. That was deliberate because there weren't jobs for that large an influx of ex-service personnel. So gradually, I guess, large numbers of American service people are going to be returned to the United States. Folks like my father, though, who'd only been in the war since 1943, didn't have the points necessary to be rotated home. So my dad was stuck in Southeast Asia in occupation duty until nearly 1947. And so many people are focused just on that, on when will I get to go home, return to my family, put my uniform away, and get back to the life that I want to be living. Also, you have to keep in mind that economically, the United States was going through a transition period of moving from war production back to producing civilian products, and that did not happen overnight. Millions of American women who had been participating in the war economy are going to be asked basically to step aside. Their jobs are going to be given mostly to returning veterans. And so folks like my mother's grandmother, who'd worked during the war as a manager in war industry, in 1945, she learns that she and actually most of her staff were being laid off and replaced by young men returning from the war. And so her last job was actually to train her replacement. And even though her particular industry was normally protected by union seniority, apparently in 1945 they just threw the rules out and said, sorry, in your case, seniority doesn't matter. You're going to be out of work, and this other person with less experience is going to replace you. And so many American women didn't want to leave their jobs. They had enjoyed having an income, having independence, having responsibility. And there was intense pressure at the end of World War II to sort of put society back the way it had been, with women working mainly as domestic partners with husbands. And so that's going on. And that's going to be a big distraction, obviously, from foreign policy. Also, 1 in 5 Americans had moved to a new state during the Second World War. You have mass migration. There was not enough housing to meet demand because very few houses and apartments had actually been built during the Depression year. And so the country's facing a housing crisis in 1945-46. And again, that's probably more important to many people than what's happening in Eastern Europe or what the Soviets are doing. Another thing to keep in mind is that Americans had been traumatized by the Great Depression, and no one was sure that the Depression wasn't about to return, that with the war over, World War II production had produced demand for labor, for jobs, and the Depression had gone away by the end of 1939. But the end of the war, many people feared, would begin to put the economy back where it had been before. And so not only were people afraid that the Depression would resume in 1945 or 46, I think many of the Depression-era generation spent the rest of their lives looking over their shoulders, worried that the Depression would return. Many young families couples who had recently married during or right after the war are now greeting their first children. And so, the beginning of the baby boom is already underway. And so, if you've ever been a parent, you know that dealing with an infant pretty much takes up all your time and energy. And you're probably, again, not thinking about the prospect for Cold War when you got this little person in your house now that requires pretty much 24-hour care and attention. So, for multiple reasons, I think most Americans are not anticipating another global crisis, and I think just psychologically, nobody wants the Cold War to happen. Most Americans want to get back to living the lives that they wanted to have lived before. Again, people my parents' generation had only experienced depression and war. So these are people who have in their minds, I guess, an idea of what life in America is supposed to be like, but they themselves had really never probably experienced sort of the good life that the American dream promised. So many people, I think, even when there's signs of problems, probably don't want to accept that they're real. So there's an exceptional group, though, that I think does see the Cold War coming. Those are service personnel who are stationed in Europe at the war's end and are witness to Soviet behavior. Soviet troops initially, when they had advanced to the point where the Allied lines met each other, Americans and Russians and Brits and others had celebrated together. That celebration and fraternization ends very quickly. The Soviet authorities basically sort of wall off their own personnel and forbid them from interacting with the other allies. That's a really bad sign. Then also Russian behavior in occupied Central Europe begins sending warning signs. The Russians begin installing communist governments all over Eastern Europe, and also in the eastern parts of Germany that they occupy. The Russians are behaving with a level of brutality that I think shocked many American service personnel. So I think that there are some people who are aware that Russia, the Soviet Russia, is likely to be a problem for the West and for the United States. But it's really not until probably 1946, 47 that Stalin's open pronouncements and activities make it clear that a conflict with the West is brewing. So, hope you've had a great first week. Have a good weekend, and I will talk to you folks later.